In my early teens, I had fallen into a bit of a slump. I was an overweight kid just entering the zitty years. I spent a lot of time eating spud patties smothered in sour cream and watching lame teen sitcoms on TV. My mother, in an attempt no doubt to nicely inspire me to pursue a more healthy lifestyle, would often encourage me to engage in the various clubs available in the area. When a nearby friend of mine signed up for the Scouts, she asked if I wanted to join. Despite my recent slump in the years previous, I had always been a person who was fascinated by nature and who loved the outdoors. So after a short description of the activities the Scouts were involved in, I was pretty excited to join. The Scouts taught you all kinds of life and survival skills, and you would often go on camping adventures to practice said skills. It was pretty awesome. Sometimes you were camping in the back 40 of a Scouter's property, and sometimes you went to well-established Scout camps. These Scout camps had various facilities and recreational activities for the Scouts to enjoy. There were often camping areas, shooting ranges, zip lines, as well as sailboat and canoe equipment. The camp instructors offered education on how to shoot, sail, canoe, and start fires with improvised equipment. Generally, each Scout troop would set up camp at a designated area and then travel to the activity areas daily. The designated areas would have multiple spread out tent sites and a central area with picnic tables surrounding a bonfire pit. Spread throughout the forest surrounding the tent sites, you would find trails leading towards what we would come to know as the Thunder Box. A Thunder Box is a box with a hole cut in the top of it. These were placed over a hole in the ground. These items were used to collect lightning during thunderstorms for later use in the electrical devices used by the Scouters. Just kidding. A Thunder Box is actually an open-air outhouse. You shit into the hole and the hole shits back. I'm sorry. Your shit falls into the hole in the ground. That's the way it works. One year, many members of our Scout troop were unavailable to go on a certain camping adventure at a Southern Ontario Scout camp. Regardless of this, 4 Scouts ended up going on the trip with 2 Scouters. We stayed at a small campground further out into the park as the more central campgrounds were for larger groups. It was a quiet area with the nearest group of Scouts more than a kilometer away. We had 3 tents and 2 Scouts per tent, and 2 Scouters sharing one. I shared my tent with Ryan, who is a friend of mine that lived near my house growing up. Our Scouters were Scouter Eric, who was a short, witty man with large glasses and a slick hairdo. And then there was Scouter Wes. He was a tall man who looked fairly slender aside from a medium-sized gut bomb. He was one of those guys who broke into a sweat quite easily, and his hair would often take on a gelled appearance as it soaked with his perspiration. Any exertion would turn his face bright red for a few moments before it sunk into a splotchy pastiness sparkled with beads of sweat. He had a great sense of humor, and he seemed to really enjoy his Scouter job. You would often catch him chuckling at the things us Scouts said throughout the trip. During our 3-night stay, we enjoyed hiking opportunities as well as a very sweet zip line. The rest of the time we spent sitting around the campfire, endlessly whittling sticks, shooting the shit, and consuming camp food like hot dogs and chili. There was one very fun game that our Scouters taught us how to play. The game was called Hunter, and it was generally played at dusk and into the early evening. The game was basically like hide and seek, but in the forest. The players would be given a 10-minute head start to go off into the woods and find a hiding spot. After that, the hunter would sneak through the forest armed with a spotlight trying to find the players. The hunter would only generally use his light when he suspected that one of the players was close. Otherwise, the players would easily detect the hunter and take evasive measures. Over the 3 nights, we played this game each evening. After playing several times, we became quite good at staying quiet and avoiding capture. We even came up with elaborate ways to dupe the hunter, like distracting him by throwing sticks in all directions or setting up our hats on trees. It was a pretty thrilling game, and although I haven't played it since, it gave you an appreciation of what it meant to be a game animal. On the last night, Ryan, Scouter Wes, and myself briskly walked down a long trail several hundred yards away from our campsite. Wes turned off the trail after a few minutes of walking, and Ryan and I continued maybe 200 yards before veering off into the forest. Ryan and I set up maybe 5 yards away from each other. We hid in the brush behind some fallen logs. We settled in and stayed quiet, waiting for the hunter to begin his pursuit. It was just starting to get dark, but the moon was very bright that night, and the leaves around us were slightly illuminated. Maybe 10 minutes passed, and we began scanning the area we expected the hunter to come from. As we surveyed, I noticed a dark mass in the bushes maybe 30 yards away from me. It appeared to be a person crouching in the bush. I couldn't see it very clearly, but I could see that it was moving slightly. I immediately thought, oh, there's Scouter Wes. I didn't think he came out this far with us. Nevertheless, in my mind, I accepted that this was Wes. Another 5 minutes passed, and Ryan and I stood slightly and both began throwing sticks all around us to see if we could trigger the hunter to use his spotlight and give away his location. No response. The coast was clear for us to move if we wanted. Ryan and I gave each other a nod, and I turned towards the dark mass near me. I whispered, "Wes! Wes!" I could see the figure begin to stir. "Hey, Wes! Wes! The coast is clear." With that, a massive 7-foot-tall dark figure rushed to its feet. As it did so, small branches and leaves fell off of its body and fluttered to the ground. The figure faced us for half a second before turning and running full blast off into the forest away from our campsite. Ryan and I stared at it as it went before turning towards each other dumbfounded. I said to Ryan, "What the fuck was that?" And he said, "I don't know what the fuck that was." At first we were just stunned, but quickly the fear began to build in the darkness. We briskly returned to the trail and in a half run returned to our camp several hundred yards away from where we were. When we got to camp, Wes was sitting there by the fire with the other scouter. We had held out hope that maybe the figure we saw was Wes, but here he was. If he had tricked us and beat us back to camp, he would have been so sweaty and red that it would have been disgustingly obvious. But he looked very unexcited. I asked him, "Wes, you're here?" He responded, "Yeah, I didn't hide very well and the hunter found me in like 5 minutes." I furrowed my brow, turned my head, and peered into the darkness of the forest behind me.
Ryan and I both stared at it as it went before turning towards each other dumbfounded. I said to Ryan, "What the fuck was that?" He said, "I don't know what the fuck that was."